Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you all for logging in to this Sikh Research Institute webinar today. My name is Jasdeep Singh and I will be the host for today's session, and Kulveer Singh will be moderating. The presentation will begin shortly, but before we get started, I wanted to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's web event. Kulveer Singh will then provide some information about the Sikh Research Institute and Harinder Singh before handing over for the main presentation. So we're looking at an example of the GoToWebinar attendee interface, which is made up of two parts. The viewer window on the left, which allows you to see everything the presenter will share on their screen, and the control panel at the right. Within the control panel is how you can participate in today's event, so let's take a look at that. By clicking on the orange arrow, you can open and close your control panel. From the View menu, you can also set the control panel not to auto-hide when inactive if you prefer to keep it always open. The audio pane provides audio information. By default, you have joined the webinar via a mic and speakers. Click Audio Setup to select your computer speaker or headset devices. If you prefer, you can join the audio via telephone and then dial in, and the dial-in information will be displayed, including the audio pin. During the presentation, if you have any questions, you may send them to our moderator through the questions pane. Simply type in your question and send. Harinder Singh will be answering all questions during the QA session, 20 minutes into the presentation, and at the end of the main presentation. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and everyone will receive an email within 7 days with a link to view a recording of today's event. If for any reason you experience any technical difficulties during the session and you can't see the main presentation, for example, then please do not hesitate to contact me via the chat panel. If you lose your internet connection or have to restart your computer during this session, then you can rejoin the session by clicking on the URL that is included in your original registration confirmation email. Finally, at the end of the presentation, I will launch a testimonial and feedback window. We'd appreciate if you take a few moments to provide your feedback and comments on how the session went and how we can improve future sessions. I'll now hand you over to Kulveer Singh, who will provide some background to the Institute and also Harinder Singh. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Kulveer Singh, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. We're delighted to have you with us today. Let me share a little bit more about the Sikh Research Institute, or SikhRI for short. Over the past 7 years, Sikh Research Institute has focused on community development through various programs. The leadership programs are developing visionaries, and we've trained over 3,000 individuals worldwide. The educational seminars are stopping misinformation, and they've reached 300,000 people globally. And the K-12 services are teaching values and language skills, and they've served 41 schools, 500 teachers, and 1,700 students. Today's webinar is free of charge for all of our attendees, but there is a cost for SikhRI to put this on. So if you do get value out of today's session, I strongly urge you to consider donating to the Sikh Research Institute through the website at www.sikhri.org. So let's begin today's session with a quick introduction of our presenter, Harinder Singh. Harinder Singh is the co-founder and the Chief Programming Officer of the Sikh Research Institute. He addresses Sikh, Panjabi, and South Asian concerns globally. He also serves on the boards of the Sikh Scholarship Foundation, the Panjab Digital Library, and United Communities of San Antonio. Before we get started with the actual session, a couple of short announcements. First up is about the leadership program entitled Civic. Civic is offered by the Sikh Research Institute, and it's a distinctive leadership development program for young adults seeking to increase their commitment towards Sikhi. It's a 2-week intensive immersion in Sikh culture, language, values, and community through understanding Bani, Vedic history, and Rath, or a discipline. It's held annually in San Antonio, Texas. The sessions on leadership development and community building serve as key foundations for Civic. Civicers find that the bonds that they form with their instructors and other students will inspire them towards activism long after the program ends. The program takes place every year in the late June to early July time period, and we encourage you to attend yourselves or let other people know about the program. For more information, they can visit the SikhRI website. Finally, last comment around questions for today's session. We strongly encourage you to help make today's session interactive. 20 minutes into the presentation, you'll have the ability to start asking questions pertaining to the material and the slides being covered. If you have general questions, we urge you to wait until the end of the presentation before you ask. In the side panel, please state your name, the city from which you're tuning in from today, and your actual question. If you'd like to verbally ask your question, please confirm that you have a microphone handy, and please address all your questions to me, Gurbani Singh, so I can compile them for Harinder Singh. So now I would like to pass it over to Harinder Singh to begin today's presentation. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Give us a few moments while Harinder puts his slide deck on. We can see the slides now, Virji.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh, and good morning, and perhaps evening to some of you, depending on which part of the world you are in. Are you guys able to hear me? Can I get a quick chat window answer from the moderators? Yep, volume is fine. Great. Thank you, Jasdeep and Kulveer Singh, for the introductions and setting up this webinar, and thanks to all of you for joining in on this Saturday. As the title of the webinar says, with whom does my allegiance lie? You might be wondering what exactly is going to be talked about today. Well, basically, this is an attempt to deal with the burning questions which are surrounding us today. I've been traveling quite a bit from Malaysia, Kenya, Australia, and quite a bit in US and Canada. And it seems to be that there are a lot of good people who want to get things done. But for some reason or the other, we are not able to figure out how to get things done. And the central question I'm posing today is, perhaps it has to do with allegiance. Who are we taking orders from? When push comes to shove, who are we aligned with? So the idea in the workshop is, on the presentation is to, can we connect with our past to see how great Sikhs of the Gurus dealt with this issue of allegiance so we can strengthen the future we are building on today onwards. To start with, first, I'm trying to figure out how to use the slides here, and it's not moving the slide. Okay, so let's start with a couple of inspirational things. And some of you know me that I generally use a lot of Puran Singh's material, so I thought I'll start with his saying first. And here on your slide you'll see he's saying in the Constitution of the Khalsa Commonwealth. I like the phrase Commonwealth because we are spread out throughout the globe now. The greatest act of genius of Guru Gobind Singh was when he transferred the divine sovereignty vested in him to the God-inspired people, the Khalsa. Pay attention that he uses the phrase God-inspired people, not generally what we end up saying, God-fearing people, by copying other traditions around us. So people who are inspired are the Khalsa, and the greatest act of genius of Guru Gobind Singh was that he gave Khalsa the authority to decide, to make decisions on behalf of the Panth, of the community, the nation. The constitution of Khalsa was thus built on the hard shines of humanity, inspired with love of God, on the God consciousness of disciples, not on law books. So what I get out of this is that we are, as Puran Singh and other places have said, people of the spirit. We were spirit-born people. And somehow it seems to be that because we are, due to osmosis or because we are surrounded by a lot of Semitic traditions, that we are becoming very legal in our approaches, and we are forgetting the spirit behind what we used to be. And the second part I want to talk about here is Sardar Kapoor Singh's quote from Parasar Prashna, where he says, the concept of Panth, which is the cornerstone of Sikh polity, is the most effective check conceivable against the individualism of the great cats of the jungle and the colorless collectivism of the beehive or the ant hill. Now, he is a Cambridge man, although this is the shortest line I could find by him. So, what is he saying here? He's basically saying that unless, well, he's not saying unless, he's saying the idea of Panth, the sovereignty of the Panth, the practice of collective leadership is the biggest thing which allowed us to go against the individualism of the great cats of jungle, as he's calling it, or colorless collectivism, which might be this, as Pai Gurdas would say, the dry moralism of beehive or the anthill. So why am I sharing this here? I think what my basic thesis is going to come down to is, if I don't know who I'm taking orders from, and I'm not taking orders from for the collective betterment of the Panth, whatever represents the Panth, then perhaps my allegiance is not really to the Guru, and the allegiance is to some other folks. So this is the overview. We'll look into the term allegiance a bit. I know it's a Western term, but because the webinar is in English, for some facilitation to start out, we'll use some English terms, and we'll try to go into the Sikh coinage of the terms and phrases. And the question is, what is Gurbani telling us? Who do we stand with? When push comes to shove, who do we really stand with? Are we going to be the silent majority which is treating Sikhi as a spectator sport? Or are we going to exercise the surat, the awareness, the collective wisdom available to us as a community, and do such sunaisi, such ki vela, which will mean calling spade a spade when it's needed. And we look at, so what is Gurbani saying? Which faction, which side, which group, or which idea, issue do we stand with? And then if we can get general ideas from Gurbani, we can look into people in the past, how have they done this, and to whom shall you and I be doing it, and why, and how we can get that done. And then we'll wrap it up with some lessons for today. Since the word allegiance has been used, let's come to some common understanding of the word allegiance, because we might have our own connotations attached to it. And I don't want you to think for a second it's only about the American Pledge of Allegiance. They happen to use the term as well. And the allegiance word is a person's loyalty and continued support for a ruler or country, group or political party, religion or belief, etc. There is no fine print in this. So It basically is saying, at the end of the day, if you have 4 options, if you have fork, if you have to decide who to vote for, if you have to decide where to spend your money, when you make a decision, where does your time go? Which thought matters most? Which organizational issue matters more? Any of those questions, whichever one you end up selecting, that's where your loyalty is, that's where your allegiance is. So allegiance comes down to not what you're openly declaring or claiming to be in after-dinner speeches or in Gurdwara platforms. It basically comes down to what actions you are taking, who is deciding your behavior, who's deciding your decision-making. Roughly, that's how I'm looking at allegiance mean. So why do we need to talk about this issue today? And by the way, this is just an attempt to understand what is going on with us. None of this is set in stone. This is just one inquiry into Gurbani and history and kind of interpretations we can do to benefit our community if we are really interested in strengthening the Panth. Because everyone claims to be Panthak these days, that's the question. I mean, there are two diabolically opposing views, and they both say we are following Gurmat, we are following Panthak tradition. So the word is being used very commonly, while the reality today is that there seems to be incredible inequality among Sikhs. Forget about even dealing with extra Sikh or extra religionists. There seems to be very incredible groupism at the extent of that others are not even Sikhs, or there is exclusivity going on. Obvious issues are like leadership vacuum and lack of clarity, but even things like, is Akal Takht for Sikhs or is it for political parties or a political party? There seems to be, whether you look at issues being faced from Canton to Quebec regarding Kirpan. I had an email last night that we have reached yet another agreement which undermines the sovereignty of Kirpan in the Canton School District. Same things that happened earlier in other diasporas as well. So how do we decide these things? Who really represents us? Who is going to allow us to tell us whether allegiance is to the Akal Takht? Everyone invokes it, everyone invokes Gurmat. But is it really the allegiance there being given to the Guru or to a group of people who seems to have different agendas, if I may call it, for the lack of a better word, to build themselves or their organizations? And then there are issues, very divisive issues, where, I mean, they existed 25 years ago, 100 years ago as well. But today, Dasam Granth, Meet and Ragmala invoke emotions, which basically we forget our civility. And we become so uncivil that we are not able to treat the person standing in front of me, even in their utter disagreement with us, that he or she actually is a Sikh of the Guru as well. Let me give you a personal example here. When I was growing up, I remember meetings of, for example, a prominent personality of Ankirti Jatha with a prominent personality of Namdami Taksal. And I saw it, it was beautiful. They had these disagreements before too regarding Ragmala and other issues as well. But when they met each other, there was cordialness, there was respect. There was this, what I will call, even if you look at it from a warrior angle, there was a code that you respect the other person because what they're bringing to the table, because of their personal commitments to the Guru, because the focus is on building the Panth, not necessarily on one or two disagreements. But today, when similar personalities meet, or the representatives of those personalities meet, the first thing which comes to mind is, this person is Taksali, or this person is missionary, or this person is Jathewala, or this person is 3HO Sikh, or this person is Sant Samaji, whatever comes to your mind. The point is that we have this scenario which Patwan Singh used to call, Sardar Patwan Singh, late Sardar Patwan Singh, that we are Sikhs are under siege. And in that siege, we are not able to figure out where do we take orders from? How do I know what to do? So people like you and me, and for the large part, either we become indifferent to the scenario. This is the silent majority which says, "Chalo apan pange lene chhado pare apne ghar chalde hain." So either there is no allegiance, which is indifference, and indifference has never been an answer. In fact, indifference is what is creating all these problems. If enough of us were thoughtful about it, we will sort this out. But enough of us have become indifferent. So few who think they are the only defenders of the faith have taken on as their mission to decide that allegiance is their version of Sikhi or their version of Panthakness. Or So either there seems to be indifference today, or there seems to be partisan allegiance, which basically means that jathebandi now, a particular group, a particular organization which was by their very mission or were in their original impetus was to strengthen the Panth, is now demanding more allegiance than the Panth itself. So basically, I'm happy being a missionary Sikh or a Taksali Sikh or a Jatha Sikh or a Sant Samaji Sikh or a 3HO Sikh, while claiming that we are for the betterment of the Panth, but we are not able to work with each other or even to allow civility among each other in some conversation where we can actually think about the betterment of the Panth. So basically, my larger thesis here is that most of us actually have no allegiance, or if some of us even have allegiance, it seems to be not to the Guru, but to the jathebandi we are operating in, institutional framework we seem to be operating in. Let's come to Gurbani for the larger directive principle, as I would call it. This is very, very interesting. This Shabad's Rahau line is, Hum harsiyon tada kiya meri har tek, main har bin pak tada avar na koi, haun har gun gawa asank anek rahau. Tada literally means group, faction. And this is saying that I have developed faction with Har. Hum is me, I have developed factionalism, groupism, cliquism, whatever you want to call it, that my allegiance, if I may interpret that, my relationship, when push comes to shove, I will align myself with Har, the all-pervading force of this universe. And then it repeats itself in the second line. Main har bin pak tada avar na koi. And just in case somebody didn't understand it the first time, and Gurbani does this quite often, that first and second lines of several shabads repeat the same thing. And this is saying again, there should be no doubt that I am aligning myself with the all-pervading force of this universe, what Sikhs generally call Vaheguru, if you want to call it Creator, Karta, whatever you want to call it. And the interpretation from this can be, and if you have time, I highly recommend you go look at the Shabad, because what it's really describing is, where is our time being spent? What kind of clannish and groupish mentality, or if I may say, animal mentality we have developed? Because you know that there's a Shabad in Guru Granth Sahib where it says, when an animal dies, 10 different things get better. When a human or a man or a woman dies, which basically is humanity in me, dies, nothing gets done. So, what is this? It's basically saying there's an animal in us. An animal in us likes to flock with their own kind. And this is what Shabad is saying. Some people have developed their own friendship circles. Some do it with their particular family members. Some do it with their in-laws. Some do it with their parents. Some do it with the chieftains. Some do it with the heads of states. It's very interesting. It's basically describing that how a mob mentality gets developed. And the antithesis of that mob mentality is what eventually gets institutionalized. Those who develop relationship with Vaheguru and those who are God-loving, God-inspired, Vaheguru-inspired people, the Khalsa, the Panth idea comes in. So the guiding principle from Gurbani is that your alliance is with the force of this universe, Vaheguru. And every other alliance is going to be temporary or false or something less than great. If we agree with that, let's look at what Sikhs were told to do and how it gets institutionalized in us. Because today's topic is not just to talk about history of the Panth, but I do want to mention what is in our psyche and who do Sikhs used to follow. One of the last instructions of Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj is Puja Akal ki Parcha Shabadda Didar Khalse Ka. We follow, we worship the timeless. Our inquiry is going to be in the Shabad incorporated in Guru Granth Sahib, and physically we work with the Khalsa. Didar is a physically looking at someone. Guru Gobind Singh Sahib said, if you want to look at me, you look at the Khalsa. And this is the second Shabad being mentioned here. Khalsa Mahima, it says, Khalsa mero roop hai khas. Khalsa mero satgur pura. That Khalsa is my complete Guru. Obviously, it's not referring to people like me who have just declared allegiance orally that I have taken Amrit, Guru Gobind Singh is my father, Mata Sahib is my mother, Anandpur Sahib is my city. We do that through the formal initiation ceremony. But that's just a declaration. I'm sure Guru Gobind Singh is not referring to people like me. He's saying Satgur Pura, which means there are certain characteristics and behavior. People who display those, Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj says, follow that because they are operating on behalf of the Guru. And in Gurmat Markand it also says, Khalsa Guru ki deh hai, ate Bani Guru Granth Sahib Atma hai. Bani de Adhar Vihar Parmarat Siddh Karan Wala Panth Puran Guru Roop hai. And the pictures here too are describing essentially that even in the toughest times of war in World War I and II, Sikhs were very clear that their thought process, the idea, the concepts, the principles, this is where when you and I have to stop saying, I think this is what we should do. Well, as soon as we say, I think, it becomes manmat, because that's exactly what Gurbani says manmat is, when we are using our own thought. Look at that photo on the right side of your screen at the bottom. And you know this, we do this during Sikhasan ceremony, we do this during Matha Tekna, we touch our head to it, or we hold Guru Granth Sahib above our head. Why? Because we feel this is the highest thought. We must interpret that. And the committed, formally initiated Sikhs, when they interpret the ideas and principles in Guru Granth Sahib, and when they come together in the Hazuri of Guru Granth Sahib to go listen to the hukum of the Guru, this is when the Granth and the Panth force becomes operational. So the point here is, Sikhs historically have been very clear that we are here to follow Guru Granth and Guru Panth. Okay. So, since there is so much confusion today, explore a few ideas into what does being Panthak mean? What are the reference points available to us for Sikh behavior? Because in our own minds, we all think I'm being Panthak. You know, I have my own pet peeves. I'll try to justify those as Sikh laws. That's what we are doing. I don't agree with certain things. I have certain misgivings. I will build things I like, that those are the criteria for being Panthak. And I will minimize or eliminate my shortcomings, and I'll say, well, those things are okay. So we basically have made it very discretionary. Very, very discretionary. So here is an attempt to sort of figure out what can we call Panthicness. Okay, so let's look at Panth. Word Panth is both a noun and a verb. I have a mix of English and Panjabi going on, but I'll talk about everything in English. Because in original, if things are in Panjabi, I left it like that. In Mahan Kosh, it says, as a verb, it means jana te firna. As a noun, it means marag rasta, paramatma di prapti dara taram mazhab. Why am I mentioning this? Because there is another confusion going on in the larger 26 million Sikh diaspora that, you know, this Panth idea is really, it's generic. There was this institutionalization is not making any sense. We should just all be on the path. That's true. Those are the literal meanings, but you know, literal meanings get institutional forms as well. This is exactly what Guru Nanak through Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj did when they established their dominion on this earth. As Satta Balwand have said, Nanak Raj Chalaya, such court Satani neem de. Guru Nanak established a dominion on this world, in this world, on the foundations of truth. He established a fort. What is that fort? Institutionalizations of these things. And one of that institutionalization is Sikh Rat Maryada, where it's very clear. It says, Tyar Bartyar Singha de Samuche Samu nu Guru Panth aakde han. Dasam Guru Ji ne isda antam sarup ban ke Guryai sompi. People with characteristics, behavior, commitment, allegiance were given the authority under the guidance of Guru Granth Sahib. They will make recommendations and decisions on behalf of the Sikh community. And this is how Encyclopedia of Sikhism captured this. Panth stands for the Sikh faith as well as for the Sikh people as a whole. Panth for the Sikhs is the supreme earthly body having full claim on their allegiance. It represented both Jugat, Jot and Jugat of the Sikhs. This is very important because this is where most of the Sikhs who are indifferent or merely spiritualist will say, we don't need to really get involved in any of these things. It's okay to be just spiritual and develop yourself. Well, that might be an option for you. Here we're trying to understand what has happened from Guru Nanak Guru period onwards. And Satta Balwand is the one who invokes these two words as well, Jot and Jugat. When he says, Jot Oha, Jugat Sai, Sahakaya Fir Paltiye, that there was no difference between any of the Gurus. To see Guru Nanak through Guru Gobind Singh as separate Gurus and create favoritisms, like we all have done in our own vicinities. Delhiites love Guru Har Krishan Sahib more. 3HO loves Guru Ramdas Sahib more. At least it seems that way. You know, some will say I only like Guru Nanak Sahib. Some will say, Sindhis will say that. Some will say I only like Guru Gobind Singh. This dissection based on the thoughts of Guru Granth Sahib is not allowed. Because Satta Balwand has written Guru Granth Sahib, Jot Oha Jugat Sahib. The wisdom was exactly the same, the spirit, Jugat. The methodology was exactly the same. Sahakaya Phir Palti, only the body changed. So Panth for us is, it stands for the people and faith, and Panth also is an institution which has given full allegiance to the Guru, and it represents the ideas and directions and decision making on behalf of the Guru. Okay, so if this is what Panth is for the people who are studying it, let's now see how it gets conquered in Sikh Rayat Maryada. So you know, this is where in Sikh Rayat Maryada, first thing I'm sharing here is, it says a Sikh's life has two aspects, individual or personal and corporate. So what is being said here? Basically in Panjabi it says Sikhan di do tarah diyan gallan mention ਕੀਤੀਆਂ ਗਈਆਂ ਨੇ, ਇੱਕ ਸ਼ਖਸੀ ਰਹਿਣੀ ਆ, ਇੱਕ ਪੰਥਕ ਰਹਿਣੀ ਆ, which means there is an individual living of a Sikh and there is a corporate living of the Sikh. There is a personal living of the Sikh, there is a collective living of the Sikh. What we are discussing today is about both elements. In your personal life, do you allow Guru Granth and Guru Panth to help you make decisions? In our community life, in our organization, institutional life, do we follow those traditions more or particular organizations' understanding of those things? Let's move on with this. The other part of this is the essential facets of Panthic life are Guru Panth, the Panth status of Guru. And it's described fully as being a Sikh has for this reason to fulfill his Panthic obligations. Obligations as a member of the corporate entity, the Panth. This corporate entity is the Panth, the Guru Panth. Panth status of Guruhood means the whole body of committed baptized Sikhs. This body was fostered by all the 10 Gurus, and the 10th Guru gave it its final shape and invested it with the Guru head. Very, very interesting. If you can overlook the vocabulary a bit, this is the standard translation available to us as Sikh Rayat Maryada. Basically what's being said here is that people who claim to be Panthak, they must submit to the ideas in Guru Granth and the interpretation of that by the body called Guru Panth. This is where Pooran Singh's thing, you know, he doesn't say they were the 5 beloved, Panj Pyare as we call it. He uses the phrase, he said they were the 5 enthroned, that they were the who were given the throne. They represented the Guru. This is when Ratan Singh Pangu comes in and he says, Padshahi was given to the downtrodden people who gave their allegiance to the Guru. In Garib Sindhan ko dehe Padshahi, ye yaad rakhe hamri guriyai. This is what Sardar Ratan Singh Pangu writes in Sri Guru Panth Prakash. The downtrodden people who aligned themselves to the ideas of the Guru, they were given the right to rule. And this is very much in line with what Guru Nanak Sahib writes, because they're all same. Guru Nanak Sahib says the same thing. He says, I'm not interested in what the established are doing. But I'm more interested in how are we dealing with the downtrodden, nichi huat nich. So if you say I'm a Sikh, if you say I am Panthak, what it means is Guru Granth and Guru Panth visible in our actions, in our behavior, and the decision making we have in our life. So let's come to the reality. Reality is nobody has issues with Guru Granth Sahib. But lots of people have issues with Panth because Panth is the one which is supposed to make decision. In fact, now the funny thing is there's so many Panths floating around. People are physically declaring other Panths. What I mean by that is, what I mean by that is that there were incidents last year which revolted into Ravidasi's declaring own Panth. The caste-based Panths are coming up. They have come out in other forms as well, but they have come out in very organized forms within India and outside India in those organizations, subsidiaries. Question is not that everyone follows Guru Granth. That's given. In fact, I read an article last year which Dr. Garewal wrote in Indian Express. And the basic thesis of that was this is in the aftermath of Vienna incident and the violence which caused in Punjab and its repercussions even in the biggest Ravadasi temple in Burnaby. And what Dr. Garewal's thesis was, he says, Sikhs really don't have issue with anyone. Issues come up not what people when they say they follow Guru Granth. He says the issues come up when other subgroups organize themselves to undermine the Guru Panth. This is very, very interesting that Sikhs end up having issues with when essentially there's an undermining of Guru Panth going on. So how do we deal with this now? If you have questions, by the way, you can start sending it to the moderator and we can start taking some of them in. So in this reality, let's try to understand in the tougher times, how did your forefathers and foremothers deal with it? People who we claim to be great Sikhs, how did they deal with this when Guru Granth was being built? By the way, if you look in history or even today, nobody questions anything about Guru Granth Sahib. It's a separate issue that our faith on Guru Granth Sahib is now being challenged from some academic circle as well, but that's a separate issue. Generally speaking, it has always been about the committed Sikhs who were making decisions on behalf of the Qawm or nation or Panth. So how did our forefathers and foremothers deal with this? This is the collective ardas after the Vadaka Lukara, where the estimates are about half of the Sikh population was killed in one day, anywhere from, estimates go from 10,000 to 30,000. This is what Sikhs said. This was the collective Panthak ardas. And I want to pay special attention to, and look at, the ardas is to Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj, and the Sikhs say, Sri Guru Gobind Singh, haath jor jor kahun, aapke bachan ki prateet kaun manego. So the Sikhs collectively are saying to Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj, that I'm asking you with my folded hands, we are asking you with our folded hands, who is going to make your instructions evident in their lives? Look at the wording. Aapke bachan ki prateet kaun manego. And look at the end of it. It says, Panth ki rakho to granth ki rahegi nath. Rakho jona panth ki to granth kaun manego nath. Look at what he's saying. He's saying to the Sikhs of Jassa Singh Ahluwalia period, Qawm ul Sultan, when he led Sikhs in the toughest times in the history of mid-18th century, Sikhs at that time are talking to Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj. It is very symbolic of how Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj himself writes when he says, Nitar pyare ko, Putar pyare nu hal murida da kehna. Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj is saying, go tell the beloved the condition of his yearning disciples. And that's what Sikhs are doing exactly. Because to us, the evidence, the self-evidence, the relationship with the Vaheguru is analogous to relationship with the Guru. So the Sikhs with their folded hands say to the Guru, make sure Panth gets protected, because if there is no Panth, there is no Granth. Granth will be reduced to something else if there is no Panth. Panth ki rakho, to Granth ki rahegi nath. Because for the rest of the world, it's just a scriptural book. And in fact, people call it that. It's Guru, which means uncontestable faith. No questions, no doubts on Guru Granth Sahib are only to the Panth. Rest of the people, they use other things as well, and we'll talk about that. So the question, the ardas of the Sikhs is supplication, arz dast as we may call it. The supplication to the Guru by the Sikhs is, please protect the Panth. Because when there's the protection of the Panth, the Granth will remain the Guru as well. Rakho jona Panth ki to Granth kaun manego. And if there is no relevance of the Panth, there will be no more Granth. This is the collective psyche, the collective oral memory tradition, the collective understanding of the Sikhs, who even their toughest time are very clear that it is the Granth Panth. It is the people who are protecting the Granth, they need to be protected as well. Let me cover a couple of more things. Kyani Gyan Singh in 18th century is writing this. And he says, this is the Panthak attitude. We talk about attitude these days. Look at this attitude. Jahan Panth pe bad pave peer, dahe aap jaye tahan sareer. I like this. This is very interesting because it's a very contradistinction to what is happening today. It says, whenever there is adversity before the Panth, they forsake their being for it, which which basically means what? That if some issue is of national and international significance, our rivalry, our understanding, our internecine warfare, our intra-Sikh idiosyncrasies have to take a back seat. And Sikhs used to do this. So the attitude of a Panthic Sikh is, you know, like what I'm today, I'm using this phrase to describe this, that karnu lagi aag, pehla aag bujhaiye, house cleaning baad kar lange. We need to put the fire out first. Let's work towards that, and we would worry about what our internal house cleaning issues are. This used to be the attitude. In this attitude, we see this very similar thing happening even 20 years ago. Now this is uncomfortable because people say, this just passed, so I want to mention this. On 26 January 1986, Sikhs got together against incredible odds again. So this is not just the 18th century Sikhs or the 17th century Sikhs. This is also 20th century Sikhs. Again, you and I can disagree, just like for 18th and 17th century, a lot of Sikhs in our nation disagreed with what they were doing. But the same thing happened in 86, where not a fringe movement, not one or two people, not one or two organizations, even when right to assemble freely was invoked or abolished in India. Again, this is not about whether you agree or disagree with the movement for independence. Panth got together at Akal Takht Sahib. There's a video, you guys can listen to it. I'm sure all of you or some of you are aware of it. Even 25 years ago, in contemporary history, this has happened, that the Panth got together and had a committee to figure out what to do. What I want to say is that detractors have always been there. This is not that things have always been great. No. There will be people who will not like what you are doing. I think there are some questions coming up, so let me start with that. Go ahead, let's take some questions.
Okay, we have one question here from Harinder Singh, and I'll just read out the question for now. The question is, the problem is there are no clear-cut objectives of the Panth Khalsa, and therefore discussing allegiance to the supported Panthic organizations cannot move the process forward. Can the presenter name 5 or any objectives of the Panth Khalsa which are accepted by these Panthic organizations? Are these objectives translatable, and can the results be evaluated to show clear-cut progress towards these objectives?
That's an excellent question. Thank you for asking this. Actually, we are heading towards there in our conversation. So far, I'm trying to establish that how Sikhs understood the idea of collective decision making, how it was relevant in our theology and history, and then we'll head into today's scenario, what can be done. But right now, we can jump to, because first of all, this idea has been undermined for almost last 200 years. The last, since the Ranjit Singh period in early 1800s. In order to revive this idea, at least in our home circles, before we expect a criteria to be developed which can be applied to all Panthic organizations, who am I to do it, right? Who is even a one group to do it? So we'll have to move the Sikh consciousness to more civil and more aware arena before we can actually create some litmus tests, if we may call it, or some criterias. In the absence of that, we need to work towards incredible awareness that we have our own traditions, and people who followed the Guru's ideas verbatim, who gave allegiance to the Guru, they are the ones we need to be following. The rest of it is noise. But I'll revisit this question a little later as we move towards that. Thank you for asking that. So what I was talking about was that if you think certain things are uncomfortable or political or create tension or at least some sort of uncomfortableness in our mind, well, what I'm trying to say is there have always been people who didn't like what Gurus were doing, including their own family members. In fact, when I look at the first 239 years of Sikh history, from Guru Nanak Sahib onwards, there were, again, you might disagree or agree with whether they were their family members, to what extent they were involved in countering or setting parallel institutions to the gurus, but the reality is this existed. So when we say let's not talk about controversial things, or being Panthak actually will make you controversial, because Guru Nanak was controversial on the day he rejected Janeu, or the day he was getting married when they wanted to throw the whole wall on him. At Kachi Kand Batala is the memorial for that in Punjab. Point of this slide is being Panthak requires you to exercise certain decision making, and that decision making is not free of consequences. That's what I'm trying to say. The decision making is always controversial. I mean, there is a controversy in a home if some members of the family don't like what you have decided. Controversy doesn't mean it's a bad thing or a good thing. Controversy just means there's a disagreement by individuals or groups of people. And my point here is that cannot be a reason not to be Panthik. This was clearly established by Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj as well, when the oral tradition maintains that Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj was told why he sent a arrow to Dadu's grave, and also when Panj Pyaras as the representatives of the Panth told Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj to do that in Chimkor Ford. But I mean, those you guys are aware of. Let me bring it out in us again. I want to look at a very popular, very commonly understood Sakhi of what happened with Chali Mukti and Mai Pago. And this is where, we can say the rubber meets the road. This is where you and I are. We all declare to be with the Guru. So had Chali Mukti. But when time is tough, this is when your allegiance gets measured. Chali Mukti said, heck with it. We know at that time they even wrote it down, Bidawa Likhta Siga. But this is when Mai Pago comes on the scene. She says, this is the time to do things. So far, it was just hunky-dory time, as we might say it in Texas. Point to understand here is allegiance is not something which you say when times are great. Allegiance is not just a ceremony you go through. Allegiance is not just your training in a daily discipline. Allegiance is when something is happening, what will you do? It's the action. Because other day I was using a scenario that there's a soldier who cleans his gun every day and he feels he's a soldier, but he never goes to the battlefield to fight. This seems to be what I seem to be mostly doing, that I do my nickname, I do my part, I do my seva, I do my whatever, we have our own checklist, and we feel we are being a Sikh. And even in Sikh Raj Maryada it says all these things are training, so you know how to do seva in real life. Like in Gurbani it says, we are not interested in just doing puns and dan. Pun dan are the charities and good virtues. In Gurbani, the higher idea is pun dan ka kare sarir. The whole body needs to be of benevolence. So for us, charity and virtue is not a transaction. We do those, so we are trained that we all become, that I become, a Panthic person becomes, the body itself is of benevolence. Everything I do, the very act of existence, the very being is Panthak. So this is a difference, this is a very concrete idea. What Chali Mukti were very committed, they were trained also, but they didn't want to do it because you fill in the blank. We all are like that. This is where the leadership comes into play. This is where somebody jada tano mano te tano committed haga, somebody who's completely committed in idea, in action, as well as in their resources. Even only they can determine what allegiance is. The rest of us are just training to give that allegiance. That's the point of this slide from that history. So how was this played out in history more? Well, missiles used to do this, even when they're not able to do it, when they're not able to like each other in terms of, like we might say that there are jathebandis today and we don't like each other. Well, this same situation existed earlier, but even then they came together to have Sarbat Khalsas and put their differences aside. Even at the time when a Sikh is at the helm of affairs as the head of a state, we might call it today, Akali Phula Singh is still able to deliver certain sentences. In Singh Sabha movement, let's make it a little bit closer to our history. people who were the leaders at the time, Khem Singh Bedi and others, look how they treated Gyani Dit Singh, Professor Gurmukh Singh. They were taken, cases honored against it. They were thrown out of the Panth. Gyani Dit Singh was told to go sit in the Jodakar, where the shoes are, so he'll get a prashad there because he belonged to the outcasts, the so-called the low caste, the Dalits. Point here is, the people who are Panthak, they don't look at what the heads of the state will do. They don't look at what the so-called religious leaders are doing. They don't look at that what else happens within the group dynamics. They look at that tano, mano, and tano. In action, in ideas, in other resources, we need to be committed to the group. This is our history. This is what being Panthak used to mean. So here are questions for some of you, and let's have some discussion if you have some responses to this. Kulveer, send a response to Kulveer and let's talk about it. This is, forget national, international issues. Let's make it very local. And here's a scenario. These are the tough questions. This is where you and I need to figure out what to do. And one question is personal. Let's say you want to take Amrit. You are present at the Amrit Sanchar, and all of a sudden, person who are doing the ceremony, they describing Maryada, which is not Panthak. Or let's flip it. Let's say you have taken Amrit, and now you've been asked to serve an administrator of the ceremony of Amrit, and you are part of the Panj Pyare, and you have included women, and people have come in to take Amrit, and there is tension being caused because there's a woman in Panj Pyare. How will you deal with this? What do we do? In one case, you want to take Amrit, you did your inquiry like you're supposed to, that whichever guru you're committed to, you better know what you're committed to. You did your inquiry, you go there. What am I supposed to do if they're telling me to do other things which are their personal preferences or their group preferences rather than what the collectivity of the Panth has decided? And secondly, you are part of the 5 who are acting on behalf of the Guru. And because you've chosen to implement the ideas of the Guru and Sikhat Maryada, some people are getting uncomfortable. What do we do? What should you do? This is a real thing. This is happening in so many communities right now. I get questions on these all the time wherever I'm traveling. I'm sure a lot of you have dealt with this too. This is why when I earlier said allegiance has 2 levels. There's a personal level, there's a collective level. At minimum, we need to figure out how to do it at a personal level. So the question when it earlier came, we are all too worried about figuring out which organization is Panthak or not. And I submit to you humbly that we need to first figure out whether I am being Panthak or not. If enough of us were being Panthak, whatever project or whatever organization we are being part of, or organizations we are being part of, they will develop that kind of a value system. We are expecting a top-down approach where the organization should know what to do. Well, if people don't know what to do, how can the leaders and the opinion and decision makers organizations know what to do? Let's look at the reality again. Please look at this slide as a learning slide. This is not about those organizations there. What I'm trying to say here is, and this is just a pie chart of what we see among Sikhs. This is the reality. This is where we need to figure out the answers. There are people who claim to be part of Taksals, Akhand Kirtani Jatha, Missionary Circle, Sant Samaj, and Sikh Dharma of Western Hemisphere. I mean, these all have their sub-branches as well. We'll just call it, these are the ideas. There's a deviation among each other here. But we haven't quite figured out how to come together. I guess 5 is a lucky number. Maybe that's why we have a 5 here. There is no luck or unluck, but the traditional elements of 5 are coming together here as well. And we have disagreements. Doctrinally, some of us in this pie chart treat Guru Granth Sahib as being ideal, and we have a little bit more Hinduized or Brahminical interpretations. And some of us made it just spirituality is the answer. Politically speaking, some say, well, let's not be political at all. And we deny this whole idea of Panth. And we are silent when it comes to civil and human rights. In other cases, we are not able to look at the communal element. And we actually, some of us undermine the idea of Guru Panth, and we disregard the Sikhat Maryada. And we make Dasam Granth, Mead and Ragmala to be the central issues to being a Sikh. In terms of our social elements, we have different codes when women are being baptized. or women are being given amrit, I should say, initiation ceremony, or some elements do treat women as being inferior. And some elements do undermine marriage and family structure. Some of them are very cultish. Some of them are displaying more individual personality being worshipped, hero worship, and exclusivism. But even in all those tensions, this is where majority of the Sikh community is. And my submission is, we have in the past figured out how to do this. Even 30 years ago, we knew how to work together towards being Panthak. Today, we are allowing the noise around us to not allowing us to work together. So what should we do here? What should be your response? Well, the need of the hour is, we'll talk about the need of the hour in a second, but I want you guys to keep looking at this slide because this is where we are. Most probably, if you are on this webinar, I can safely say that 85% of the Sikh community is on this slide. At least 85% of those who want betterment of the Panth. 85% of the normal population curve is somewhere here. They're all very great people. They all have done things for community. They all have well intentions, but those intentions are not translating into certain allegiance which are actionable. This is where I think the earlier question as well was, that how do we make this group move? How do we make these people move? Well, let's go to the next slide. Need of the hour is to find common grounds. Agree on the critical issue. Common ground does not mean that you have to create uniformity, that you have to work on every single thing. You have to agree on every single thing. No. In fact, that's unnatural. In fact, according to Mahakavi Santokh Singh, this is the reason why Guru Arjan Sahib gave up his life. Chhai jati ekta anekta bilai jati. Uniformity was being established and diversity was being killed. This is why Guru Arjan Sahib's martyrdom was necessary. So common ground means, and I submit to you, common ground for Sikhs is Guru Granth and Guru Panth. Granth Panth relationship. Everything else, let's figure out how to work together on. Figure out how to work together, which means what now? Today we are being uncivil. We don't know how to sit around and have a conversation. Before we take on national and international issues, we need to change the behavior, transform the behavior. Khalsa is the one who displays love. Khalsa is the one who lives in continuous awareness. We need to enforce this at a personal level of allegiance to the Guru before we demand corporate or Panthak level of allegiance. We can't even sit have a conversation these days. I think that's the need of the hour. Work to bring understanding and trust, which means contentious issues need to be left aside. We need to at least agree on the mission. The mission is Granth Panth. So whether it's Akhand Kirtani Jatha, Sant Samaj, Nandami Taksal, 3HO, you name it, missionaries, this needs to be talked about. This is what we need to talk about. How do we come together to work on the issues? And then we can look at other things. Should we involve, what do we do with this? I don't know, you guys tell me. I think this is still secondary, to be honest, because we'll have disagreements here. What to, our Nirmala is part of the decision making. I know they're great traditions. I don't know the answers. I'm just saying we need to bring it on the table. We need to start talking about the issues. What about the Udasis, the Mahants, and the Seva Panthis? This might be the gray area, as we call it. I don't know. But the slide before is not a gray area. This is where maybe 5% of the active Sikhs are. They need to figure out how to work on this. This is the area where we don't know what to do, but this needs to be part of the conversation. They have been part of the traditions. They have strengthened the traditions. They have contributions to the Sikh faith and people, but we just don't know how to deal with it. They're not part of the conversation these days. We need to figure out how to make them part of the conversation. And at the same time, we also need to figure out understanding how to contextualize the role of the state. State has always been there in a 500-year history to fuel the controversies, to create more confusion. They have promoted the detractors. You know, the Nirankaris and Radhaswamis and Namkaris are coming out of some of those traditions. Sacha Sauda, Panyadewala, Ashutosh are coming out of this tradition. They malign the community leaders. State has always done that. Look at how they dealt with Baba Banda Singh Bahadur and how they dealt with Jarnail of 1984. So must understand that state plays a role in skewing or establishing some people as being the real Panth versus the other. We got to watch out for it. This needs to be part of our conscience that, hey, let's understand things within our own tradition rather than following the propaganda war. I have created a separate slide on this, and I don't want this to be the main idea, but basically these three organizations, Namtaris, Nirankaris, and Radha Swamis, I think they do undermine, as I understand historically, Granth Panth. How? Because they do have parallel guruships. When somebody creates a parallel guruship, they're undermining guruship of Granth Panth. There's a disregard for the institution of the Khalsa and Amrit. They have separate codifications completely. So basic thing is, formally, there is undermining of the idea of Granth Panth by these organizations, these three at least. Let's move on. Let's come to today now. Earlier, being Panthak meant that you trusted other Sikhs, you accepted other Sikhs, and you strengthened the Qaum. And Qaum is more than Panth. You strengthened the whole of Sikh population. Today, there is destruction, intolerance, and self-aggrandizement. Today, even if I feel, or my organization I work with is being Panthak, when we talk about Sikh issues, we don't think about 26 million Sikhs. But when we need the funding, we go to all 26 million Sikhs. We are not clear. We need to be more genuine. We need to go back to the earlier style. Panth works to strengthen the Qaum. Panth works to empower every single Sikh and Sarvata Pala eventually, but today that's not the topic. We are here to empower every Sikh. We ourselves need to be, our allegiance needs to be clear. Doesn't mean we only work for the betterment of those. We work to improve the lives of every Sikh. We trust other Sikhs. We accept other Sikhs as they are, even if they are not part of the decision-making process yet. So the question at a personal level is, am I strengthening the institution of Guru Granth Panth? If I am not, how do I expect Guru Gobind Singh Sahib to come help me? Because he's very clear in his promise. He says, Jabe gahe Bipran ki reet, main na karo inki prati. One interpretation of that Bipran or Brahmanism is, Brahman felt that he was the religious expert. If I and you and our organizations act like they are the answer, the expert, then Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj is not with us. He's only with us when we remain unique, and our uniqueness was we are the collective decision makers, not individual decision makers. So to the earlier question, and please send more questions, we have 15 minutes left, to Kulveer Singh, and we can start taking them. This is the need of the hour. This is what you and I need to do. Before we figure out how to get independent Akal Takht, before we figure out which organization is Panthak, this question is a personal one. It's Kennedy-esque in a sense that before you ask Akal Takht what it can do for you, you need to figure out what can you do to strengthen and make Akal Takht independent. And I'm almost done. This is where allegiance in action comes in. Individual, you and I need to make choices which are Granth Panth centric. Guruship is to the Guru Granth and Guru Panth, which involves understanding the directives in Guru Granth Sahib, that's the Bani. That involves understanding the Sikh traditions of history, not the Western traditions and their understanding of Sikhi, not the Bengalis and the Persian writers only and the Indian writers. What about the Sikh perspectives of these? And Rahat, our lifestyle, our maryadas, our traditions. You and I need to start making decisions based on Panthic tradition. The centeredness is around Granth and Panth. And what that means at individual level is nobody's putting a gun on your head that you need to act racist, sexist, and a clanist way. But we are. In our own homes, in our schools, in our gurdwaras, in our jathebandis. There are splits in jathebandis based on caste now. The jathebandis which are based on clans or area. But what's going on here? Nobody, this the first part, the individual part, the shaksi part of Rahat Maryada, is saying, how can you start making your decisions based on Guru Granth and Guru Panth ideas? And one concretization of that is there needs to be zero tolerance for racist and sexist behavior, at least in your own circle of influence, in your own homes. At the Panthak level, we need to learn to filter out the noises. We need to be focused on the vision of Begumpura. And one element of Begumpura, as articulated in Guru Granth Sahib, is there will never be stability. Kayam Dayam Sada Patshahi. In Guru Granth Sahib it says the Patshahi remains stable. Stability is there when there is what? And one element of that is Dom Naseem. Basically, as long as there is a second and third class citizen, if somebody feels they're a second and third class citizen, whether at home or school or Gurdwara, your jathebandi, your country, wherever, there will not be stability. So people who want to develop Panthic organization, earlier I was asked what can be done. I've only come up with two things. That their focus is Begumpura, a city without sorrow, and that city without sorrow can become reality. It's not a utopia. It was envisioned by the Gurus. It was practiced by the Gurus. It has been practiced by the Sikhs as well, including Banda Singh Bahadur onwards. And that only happens, one litmus test of that is nobody feels like a second or third class citizen. That's the focus. That needs to be the vision. Everything else is a noise at the end of the day. And second thing we can do in collective is we have principled alliances. What does that mean? Panthic groups are the ones which have a focus. We must have a focus on what we are doing. We need to get together because we believed in unity of Granth Panth. We need to get together because it's a national, international issue for the Sikhs. For that purpose, there needs to be alliance. So our alliance is very issue focused, very project focused, with a bigger purpose of Guru Granth and Guru Panth. All of this slide, what I'm mentioning here, two ideas at a personal level and collective level, they are all actionable items. So they are not declarations. They are not something we will do in our speeches. They need to become part of our characteristics and behavior. So what I've tried to do so far, if you have questions, please start asking. We have about 10 minutes left. Is show what allegiance is in generic sense. In Guru Granth Sahib, it says allegiance is to the Vaheguru and by deduction to the Guru. Guru in Sikhi is Granth and Panth. There have been no issues on the Granth, but Panth, there have been issues from day one, who are the decision makers essentially. What constitutes a Panth is a combination of characteristics, behaviors, actionable things, as well as formal initiation ceremony. And today, even those who are going through it, they are making their jathebandis to be more important than the idea of collective leadership. That's what I've tried to cover so far. Let's take some questions. Go ahead.
Okay. Harinder, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a question from Gurmeet. It says, Virji mentioned that Ramdasiyas are declaring their own Panth, and we're hearing a lot about this in our local talk shows and radio talk shows and newspapers. But the reality is that it's been many years that all of these so-called backward classes have been treated very badly on the basis of their caste by the Panth. But what has the Panth done to include them so that they can feel integral to the Panth? Or what should the Panth be doing to make them feel like they're Panth so that they do not need to have they don't have to feel the need to separate themselves and make their own distinctive Panth?
Thank you, Gurmeet. Thanks for asking. This is an excellent question. Actually, just a minor correction there. It's not Ramdasiyas, it's Ravidasiyas, basically. But coming back to the spirit of your question, you're absolutely right. I say the same thing. I've been part of those talk radios, especially in the Vancouver area. In fact, before the Vienna incident happened, I've been going to that Ravidasi Gurdwara in Burnaby, and people used to ask me, why are you doing it? I said, well, before I say that they should stand with us, we need to figure out why was there a need for them to go establish their own Gurdwara. We did not embrace them. We are practicing, for the large part, very, what I called earlier, racist behavior, clannish behavior, tribal behavior. You're absolutely right. What needs to happen is, and by the way, it's not the Panth. We need to become more clear about it. People who are not practicing the ideas of the Guru are not Panth. If the behavior, the characteristics in our ideology, in the way we deal with these things are not reflective of the Guru Gobind Singh's ideals, Guru Nanak Sahib's ideals, then that's not the Panth. Panth has been hijacked. Panth has been hijacked multiple times in our history. And that's why I showed from Guru Nanak onwards there were parallels being set up, and even now it's been hijacked. When certain people feel like second or third class citizens, it's not a Panth. We were always a Panth. One Panth idea has been around and it needs to be revived again. What we need to do is anyone, that's why I said, there are 26 million Sikhs in the world. People who feel Panthak, they need to worry about every single one of them. They need to empower every single one of them, whether they look like them or not, whether they eat like them or dress like them or do part like them or not. That's what Panthak Sikhs used to do. They were very clear about their commitment to the Guru, and part of their commitment was that we will look at other fellow Sikhs in trust, and we will build them, we will strengthen the whole Qaum, not just the ones who practice Sikhi like me. So in the short of it is that the reason we have not done much as a community to integrate our processes as we used to be integrated earlier. In fact, the height of the folly is the Shabad I mentioned to you of the Begumpura, the vision of Begumpura, is written by Bhagat Ramdas ji. And we have not understood what the Shabad is. The people in the mainstream need to understand it. Anyone who feels like they're being persecuted or they're being repressed, before you ask them to do certain things, others who are part of the silence, which was indifference, or are actively not allowing other so-called low caste to get up and join us, they need to ask themselves what they need to change. So I 100% agree with you that we need to display better solidarity, both in an action and as well as vocalization, because not enough of that happens today. Next question, please.
My apologies, it was Gur Amrit, not Gurmeet. My apologies for the wrong name there. Next question is from Harinder Singh from New York. Is there an effort to get the various jathebandis, the various groups together? And if not, what can we do to promote this kind of unity at a, maybe say at a very practical level, not at a big level, but what can I do in my local community to start getting this kind of dialogue going?
Excellent question, Ravinder Singh. As I tried to say earlier, that more or less, I'm borrowing this from Sardar Jagjit Singh, wrote a book called The Sikh Revolution, and within that book, his larger thesis is that gurus work to change the value pattern of an individual. And as a byproduct of that, community changed. We need to work towards empowering the individual. We need to transfer and impart the Sikh values to people. When enough of us do it, then the community is ready to get changed. So that's my first answer. Second part, if you're really interested in forging these unities, yes, there have been movements to do this at certain levels here and there, but nothing has come out. My personal submission on their understanding is that nothing much comes out because the value pattern of the individuals are not clarified. We really need to, if constituency is aware, this is the larger thesis of Guru Granth Sahib, then the leadership will be aware and leadership will work together. If constituency is blind, then they will not forge alliances in a proper way. And this happened 80 years ago when average Sikh was aware in Punjab. There was great political, social, religious movement. Gurdwara Sudhar movement. Akali Dal was founded that day, and Jathedar Akal Tak was replaced. All those things happened because an average Sikh was getting aware. So I personally think the answer lies in changing your reality in your home, in your school, in your Gurdwara, in your Jathebandi. That can have a synergetic effect. Yes. Next question.
Okay. Next question, I'll combine a couple of questions. One is from Baljit from Fridabaad, and another one is Manpreet. And I guess these questions have to do with the composition of the Panth and the requirements of being considered part of the Panth. Are Amritaris considered the Panth? Is it Kesataris part of the Panth? Can a non-Amritari, can a not Kesatari be considered part of the Khalsa Panth?
Thank you to both Baljeet, and I didn't get the other name, sorry about that, the questions you've asked. I sort of covered that in a hurry earlier, that Sikh Maryada very clearly specifies that people who are part of the Panth are the ones who have at minimum given formal commitment through the initiation ceremony of Amrit to the Guru. So Panth, and I've added to that, reflecting from Gurbani as well as Khalsa Mahima and other places, that minimum element is that you are initiating ceremony. But I also said when Guru Gobind Singh Sahib is saying Khalsa Mera Satgur Pura, he's obviously asking that it's not be people like Harinder that who have just taken Amrit, but their behavior and the way they think and their tan man tan is very visibly evident as to what they are up to. So that's the part. You know, you have to have some criteria, and this is what Sikhs have been dealing with or since Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj onwards, and I think it's a good system to work with. By the way, before we get into that, I agree with that or disagree with it or we need to change that, I just want to remind everyone, system hasn't been working for 200 years. Before you think about changing things, we need to understand the systems and see the processes before we get into nitpicking on one or two things. The larger question here, that's why, is we need to, in our personal lives, become Panthak. More and more as we do that, we will see the synergetic effects of that. Yes, next one. Next question, please.
Hello, Harinder?
Yes.
Okay, next question is asked by Harinder Singh, and it's a personal question. In one's life, it's easy to get confused when there's so many different Ratamradas that have been articulated out there. There's each jathebandi has one, the Panthak or the SGPC is considered to have their own Ratamrada. What should one's compass be to navigate through all of these different declarations?
As I said earlier, in fact, part of the confusion or sort of blowing the confusion out of proportion, one of the reasons that has happened is because we are not following Sikh Maryada. That's the only one not written by or articulated by one individual. Every other Maryada out there is like Rahatnames, which are written by or one person's opinion and understanding of what Panth is, what Guru is, or what Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj has asked us to do and what Sikh is supposed to do. The only one which has come close to the consensual decision making in our history, and that's a tall order, by the way, because that's the only time it has been tried. It was a 13-year process. It's a Sikh Maryada. It is not SGPC's. It is published by SGPC and it is published by several other organizations. I think, historically, it's been mentioned that that needs to be the minimum criteria. And the definitions I had picked out were exactly from Sikh Maryada, which is what Akal Takht Maryada is. And by the way, just a trivial thing, but this might give some idea as to how Sikh leaders of other jathebandis dealt with this. Jathedar Janal Singh Pindrawale belonged to Damdami Taksal. When he was the leadership force in the Panth and he was running the affairs of Akal Takht, he did not change the Maryada of Akal Takht. He did not replace it with Damdami Taksals. This is what leadership does. They are very clear about their house rules, but when it comes to the Panth, they do not apply their preferences to the Panth. And this is huge given in the 80s what was going on in the Punjab politics as well.
Okay. Next question is, we'll take, maybe you can comment on this current affairs, this kind of maybe, this is from Manpreet. The SGPC and the Delhi Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee have not been able to come up with a Nanak Shahi calendar. Why are there such differences and why are such small things causing a rift between the groups? So maybe you can reflect on the controversy with the Nanak Shahi calendar and how that reflects the state of Panthic unity around the world.
Sure. Sure, I can comment on it, but I'll do it in the context of what we were discussing. I'm calling that the noise. We need to filter out the noises. As long as we are not clear about what we are committed to, we will not know what the answers are going to be, and the answers will be changed for you and me by those who are running the religious and political affairs in Punjab and in India. And they are making decisions on our behalf because you and I are not aware, we are not participating in the process, is what I'm going to say. So why is this happening? First of all, it's a big noise because Depending on who is controlling Akal Takht and SGPC, and it seems to be one political party, and in the voting year, they have to accommodate so many different factions within Indian realities so they can get voted in. This is where it's coming from. What should we do? Focus on the bigger issues. Granth Panth centricness. Everything else is a noise. It's a house cleaning issue. Until we become civil, we will not be able to solve this. Until we have independent Akal Takht, we cannot solve this. And these kind of things are thrown on us. Every other month, some issue gets thrown on us. All of us get busy discussing it and throwing each other's turbans in some occasions as well, taking turbans off. What do you think Gurbani Singh Maharaj is looking at us and saying in idea and spirit, these are the Sikhs? Of course, he's not referring to Khalsa Mera Satguru Pura to those Sikhs. We need to become clear about our own allegiances before we can expect to change the realities we are living in. We are out of time. If it's okay, I want to just cover one more thing, and I want to talk about this slide as a conclusion. This is our psyche. This is the Sikh psyche. This is what Sikhs were focused on earlier. And look at this. I love it the way Sardar Kapoor Singh has written in Prasar Prashna. He says, Guru Gobind Singh terminated human succession to the office of the Guru and established instead the condominium of the Granth, the book, and the Panth, the order of the Khalsa. Ever since, the Sikhs recognize no human successor to the Gurus and speak of Guru Panth and Guru Granth in the same breath, in whom the joint sovereignty of this as well as the other world rests till the end of time. And he continues, he says, collective entity of the Panth in synergy with the Guru Granth is invested with sui generis, is sovereignty, temporal and spiritual both. Basically, he's saying, again, what we've been talking about so far and what Dr. Garewal has recently written in last year as well, and what Sikhs have known, every Panthic Sikh have known, that we must protect the sovereignty of Granth Panth. This is how we become independent people. This is how we became independent. This is how Guru freed us. This is the order of the Guru. And because you and I are very clear about Guru Granth, and you and I are not as clear about Guru Panth, a lot of confusions are taking place. This is part of an ingenious design to keep us confused, so our allegiances remain divided rather than unified. I again thank Kulveer and Jasdeep for helping us put this webinar together. Thanks to all of you for participating in it and allowing me to share an attempt at how to forge sort of a clear allegiance towards the Guru, and I did it through mentioning ideas from Gurbani history and our Rahat. I will turn it over to the moderator, host now, and he will be launching testimonials and feedback very soon. Thank you. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. This is Jasdeep. Please take a moment in filling out some of the feedback to make these sessions better, so we can continue to provide excellent material and thoughts to think about as we pursue our lives. I'll be launching a testimonial, so thank you very much for attending today, and Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.